The air in the mahogany-paneled law office was so heavy I could hardly breathe. My son Richard sat tall in his expensive suit, Brooke's manicured hand resting possessively on his arm like she was marking her territory. I kept my gaze fixed on the leather-bound will in front of Mr. Patterson, the family attorney who had known James and me for over 30 years. We'll now proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of James Edward Holloway, Mr. Patterson announced, his voice echoing against the walls lined with law books. I smoothed my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to James's funeral 3 months ago, and tried to quiet the trembling in my hands. I wasn't prepared for what came next. To Richard Holloway, Mr. Patterson read, adjusting his reading glasses, the luxury penthouse overlooking the Potomac in Washington, D.C., along with its contents and the sum of $2 million. Applause erupted inside Brooke's eyes, her smirk sharper than glass. She squeezed Richard's arm, and he nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected. I felt a chill settle over me. James and I had purchased that penthouse as an investment years ago. We'd talked about spending our retirement there, watching the cherry blossoms bloom each spring along the Potomac. Then the lawyer continued. To Grace Holloway, my beloved wife of 35 years, the family's Blue Ridge cabin in its current condition. I blinked. The cabin? That rundown, forgotten place we hadn't visited in nearly 15 years? I searched Mr. Patterson's face for some hint of a mistake, but he simply adjusted his glasses and continued reading minor bequests to distant relatives. Brooke leaned close, her perfume sharp as vinegar, her voice slicing through me like a dagger. Fits you perfectly, you stinking old woman. Dusty, broken, useless, just like you. Richard said nothing. My only son, the boy I had nursed through fevers and nightmares, the young man whose college essays I'd proofread until dawn, the adult whose wedding I'd spent a year planning, lowered his gaze too cowardly to defend me. There must be some mistake, I whispered to Mr. Patterson when the reading concluded. James wouldn't leave me with just a cabin. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. I'm afraid these were Mr. Holloway's explicit instructions, Mrs. Holloway. The documents are legally binding. But our home in Bethesda? Our savings? Our investments? My voice cracked as the full weight of my situation settled over me. The Bethesda house was put in Richard's name last year, he explained quietly, and most of the liquid assets were distributed according to Mr. Holloway's wishes. I turned to Richard, who was already standing, collecting his documents with mechanical precision. Richard, I don't understand. Where am I supposed to go? I've been living with you and Brooke since your father's diagnosis. Brooke answered for him. That arrangement was temporary. We need our space back. She inspected her manicure with practiced indifference. You've got a whole cabin now. Perfect timing, really. But Mother, Richard finally spoke, his voice professional and detached, like he was handling a difficult client. We've already packed your things. They're in your car. We can have the rest shipped to wherever you decide to settle. The words hit me like physical blows. You packed my things? Without even knowing what would be in the will? He at least had the decency to look slightly ashamed. Brooke thought it would be more efficient this way. Minutes later, Brooke grabbed my suitcase from the receptionist area and shoved it toward the door, sneering as though I were a stray dog being released into the street. Don't forget your walker, Grandma, she said loudly enough for the entire office to hear. I was 62, and I had never used a walker in my life. The elevator ride down was silent torture. In the parking garage, Richard handed me an envelope. The cabin keys and directions, he said flatly. There's also some cash to get you settled. I took it without a word, my dignity the only possession I had left that felt truly mine. As they turned to leave, Richard hesitated, almost as if he wanted to say something more. But Brooke tugged his arm, and whatever moment might have existed between us vanished. With nowhere else to go, I drove out of Washington, D.C., past the affluent suburbs of Bethesda where I'd raised my family, and headed west toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. Tears blurred my vision as familiar landmarks disappeared behind me. The life I had known, the life James and I had built together, was being erased, and I couldn't understand why. Night had fallen by the time I reached the winding mountain roads. My headlights cut. Through the darkness, illuminating swirls of early autumn leaves dancing in the October air. I hadn't been to the cabin since Richard graduated high school. James had always loved this place, even when I complained about the isolation and the endless repairs. The gravel driveway was overgrown, branches scraping against my car as I pulled up to the dark, silent structure. It looked smaller than I remembered, sadder. The porch sagged slightly on one side, and the blue paint had faded to a ghostly gray in the moonlight. When I finally unlocked the cabin, dust swirled in the stale air. I fumbled for a light switch, but nothing happened. Of course, the electricity would have been turned off years ago. I found an old kerosene lamp by the door, exactly where James always kept it, and managed to light it with shaking hands. The weak, flickering light revealed cobwebs in the corners, sheets draped over furniture like shrouds. This forgotten place was all I had left. I sank onto the covered sofa, too exhausted to even cry anymore. What would I do? How would I live? At 62, with no home, limited savings of my own, and apparently no husband's estate to rely on, my future stretched before me like an empty road. And that's when I saw it. An old trunk at the foot of the stone fireplace. It hadn't been there the last time we visited. I approached it slowly, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. The brass lock gleamed in the lamplight as if it had recently been polished, unlike everything else in this dusty time capsule. Inside, beneath faded quilts and forgotten photographs, lay a leather-bound journal and a stack of documents, all in James's handwriting. The first page of the journal made my heart stop. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then things have unfolded exactly as I feared they might. I'm sorry for the pain you must be feeling, but there are things you don't know, things I've protected you from. Start by looking at the geological survey. All will become clear. Trust no one but George Alcott. He knows everything. With all my love, James. I collapsed beside the trunk, clutching the journal to my chest. My disgrace, it seemed, was about to become my family's downfall. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, casting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. I had spent the night in James's old recliner, his journal open on my lap, reading until my eyes burned. Each page revealed a husband I thought I'd known completely, but who had kept secrets that made my head spin. The most shocking discovery lay in the geological survey report dated 3 years before James's death. Apparently, our worthless cabin sat on land containing significant lithium deposits, the kind that tech companies desperately needed for batteries. According to James's notes, the estimated value was over $60 million. I reread the passage in his journal that explained why he'd kept this from me. I discovered the lithium deposits by accident when the county was surveying for a new water line. I've kept this secret because I've seen what sudden wealth does to people. Richard has changed since marrying Brooke. His values, his compassion, everything we taught him seems to be fading. They're focused on appearances, on climbing social ladders. If they knew about this land, I fear what might happen to you, to us. So I've created a plan. By the time you find this, I'll be gone, but you'll be protected. A knock at the door startled me. I quickly closed the journal and hid it under a cushion before answering. A tall, bearded man in his 60s stood on my porch holding a covered dish. His weathered face creased into a smile that reached his kind eyes. Mrs. Holloway, I'm George Alcott. I live about a mile down the mountain. James asked me to check on you when you arrived. My breath caught. You knew I was coming? He nodded. James and I stayed in touch over the years. He told me you'd come eventually. Asked me to look after this place until then. He offered the dish. Venison stew. Figured you might not have groceries yet. I invited him in, grateful for both the food and the company. As I cleared space at the small kitchen table, George looked around with a practiced eye. Place needs work, but the bones are good. I've kept the roof patched and checked on it after storms. James paid me to maintain the exterior, but we agreed I wouldn't come inside unless necessary. You knew James well? I asked, serving the stew into dusty bowls I'd quickly rinsed. George settled into a chair with the ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. Met him about 10 years ago when he started coming up here alone. Said he was working on a special project. Alone? James told me he stopped coming here. Altogether. George's expression shifted slightly. He came quarterly like clockwork. Spent days organizing papers, meeting with surveyors. Always said it was for your future. My hands trembled. Did he tell you about the lithium? George studied me carefully before answering. He did. Made me promise not to tell a soul until you found the trunk. He leaned forward. Mrs. Holloway? Grace, I corrected. Grace. There are people who've been trying to buy parcels all around here. 3 different companies sent representatives last year alone. James turned them all away without telling them why. Said when the time was right, you'd make the decisions. I pushed my stew aside, appetite gone. But why would he leave me just this cabin in his will? Why let Richard have everything else? George's expression softened. From what James told me, he was protecting you. Said your son had changed, that his wife had ambitions that troubled him. Brooke, I whispered, remembering her cruel smile at the will reading. James was worried they might try to control you, pressure you if they knew about the lithium. This way the land is yours alone. No one can touch it without your permission. The pieces started falling into place. James hadn't abandoned me. He'd secured my independence in the only way he could. But that meant they kicked me out, I said, the reality of yesterday's humiliation washing over me anew. They packed my things before the will was even read. They couldn't wait to get rid of me. George's eyes flashed with anger. James feared something like that might happen. That's why he asked me to help you. I'm a retired contractor. I can get this place habitable again. I can't pay you much, I admitted. I don't know how much money I have access to right now. He waved away my concern. James set up an account for cabin repairs. It's modest, but sufficient to make this place comfortable. We can start today if you'd like. For the first time since James's death, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone. I had a plan, or at least James had made one for me. After breakfast, George helped me open windows to air out the musty cabin. As sunlight poured in, the place looked less desolate. Beneath the dust and neglect lay the charming mountain retreat James and I had once loved. You'll need a phone line and internet installed, George noted, making a list. And the generator should be serviced before winter. Those mountain nights get cold. As he spoke, I wandered to the back bedroom where James and I had slept during family vacations years ago. The bed was still there, covered with a sheet. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of us, younger, happier, standing on the porch with teenage Richard between us. All of us. Smiling in the summer sunlight, I picked it up, wiping away dust with my thumb. We looked like the perfect family then. What had happened? When had Richard changed? When had I stopped noticing? My cell phone rang, breaking the silence. Richard's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Mother. His voice sounded strained. Did you arrive safely? Yes, I replied, my tone carefully neutral. Good. Listen, Brooke and I were thinking perhaps we should come visit the cabin to see your situation. The sudden interest struck me as odd. Why would you want to do that? Yesterday you couldn't wait to get rid of me. That's unfair. We simply thought you'd want your independence. His lawyer voice had returned. Besides, we should discuss what you plan to do with the property. It's quite remote for someone your age. Someone my age. As if I were ancient and incapable. Actually, I'm quite comfortable here, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. An old friend of your father's is helping me settle in. A friend? Richard's voice sharpened. Who? George Alcott. Apparently your father asked him to look after the place. A pause. I've never heard that name before. Mother, you shouldn't trust strangers. There are people who prey on vulnerable widows. I nearly laughed at the irony. I'm fine, Richard. You don't need to worry about me. We'll come this weekend, he declared, ignoring my assurance. Brooke thinks we should help you decide what to do with the property. Of course she did. Had they somehow learned about the lithium? Or was this just another attempt to control me? That's not necessary, I said firmly. Mother, be reasonable. That cabin isn't worth anything, but the land might fetch a decent price if we sell it to developers. You could get a nice apartment in a retirement community. I closed my eyes, gathering strength. I'll think about it. I have to go now. After hanging up, I rejoined George in the main room. My son and daughter-in-law want to visit this weekend to help me decide what to do with the property. George's expression darkened. They work fast. James warned me this might happen. Do you think they know about the lithium? Doubtful. But they might suspect the land has some value. Developers have been buying up property all through these mountains. He hesitated. Grace, there's something else you should know. James left papers with me. Legal documents. The mineral rights to this land are separate from the property deed, and he put those exclusively in your name years ago. Even if you sold the cabin, you'd still control what's underneath. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. He really did think of everything. He loved you, George said simply. Said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, I began to feel something unexpected. Strength. James hadn't left me with nothing. He'd left me with everything that mattered. And now I had decisions to make about who I could trust and what kind of woman I wanted to be in this new chapter of my life. The cabin wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. And perhaps my salvation. By Friday morning, the cabin had undergone a remarkable transformation. George had assembled a small team of local workers who attacked the repairs with surprising efficiency. The electricity hummed through updated wiring, the plumbing no longer groaned, and fresh paint brightened the walls. I'd spent every waking hour cleaning, sorting, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Richard and Brooke. "They'll be here tomorrow," I told George as we shared coffee on the newly repaired porch. October sunshine spilled across the mountains, painting the autumn foliage in brilliant gold and crimson. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this." George leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the valley below. "James left something else for you. Wasn't sure when to give it to you, but now seems right." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Instructions for dealing with Richard and Brooke. I stared at the envelope, recognizing James's handwriting. Even from beyond the grave, he was still trying to protect me. "Did you read it?" "No." George shook his head. "But James told me the gist. Said you shouldn't reveal what you know about the land." "Not yet." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated just 2 weeks before James died. "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then Richard and Brooke have shown their true colors. I've watched our son change over the years, becoming someone I barely recognize. The boy who once gave away his allowance to a homeless man now calculates every interaction for personal gain. Brooke's influence has been considerable, but the weakness was already in him. When they visit the cabin, and they will, once they realize you aren't simply going to fade away, reveal nothing about the lithium deposits. Let them believe this land is worthless. Their greed must expose itself fully before you act. I've arranged for attorney Marcus Winthrop at Jenkins and Winthrop in Washington to handle the mineral rights contracts when you're ready. He has all the necessary documentation and will represent your interests exclusively. His card is in the trunk. Remember who you are, Grace. You've always been stronger than you believe. Don't let them diminish you. All my love. Always. James." I wiped away tears, folding the letter carefully. He knew exactly what would happen. "James was perceptive," George agreed. "Said Richard started changing after he married Brooke. Became fixated on status, on appearances. We raised him better than that," I whispered, more to myself than to George. "People make their own choices, Grace. You can't take responsibility for that." I nodded, though the pain of Richard's betrayal still cut deep. "So I shouldn't tell them about the lithium?" "Not unless you want to see how quickly they'll try to take it from you," George warned. "Lithium's being called white gold these days. Every tech company needs it for batteries. The deposits under this mountain could make you one of the wealthiest women in Virginia." The thought was dizzying. Just days ago, I'd been a displaced widow with nothing but a dusty cabin. Now I was sitting on a fortune that could change everything, or destroy what little I had left of my family. That afternoon, I drove into the small town of Riverdale, the closest settlement to the cabin. The single main street featured a grocery store, pharmacy, hardware store, and diner, all the essentials for mountain living. As I gathered supplies, I was struck by how different this world was from the manicured perfection of Bethesda or the sleek sophistication of Washington, D.C. In the grocery store, people nodded hello. The cashier, Darlene, according to her name tag, chatted about the weather as she rang up my purchases. "You staying up at the old Holloway place?" she asked, bagging my items. "Yes," I replied, surprised she knew. "It was my husband's. James's widow then." She smiled warmly. "He spoke of you often when he'd come through town, always buying those fancy teas you like." I blinked back sudden tears. "He came here regularly? Every few months, like clockwork. Last time was just before he passed. Said he was setting things right." She handed me my bags. "He was good people. This whole town was sad to hear he'd gone." I left the store with more than groceries. I carried new insights into the man I'd thought I knew completely. James had created an entire life up here that I'd known nothing about. Back at the cabin, I prepared for battle. I stocked the refrigerator, made up the guest bedroom with fresh linens, and hid James's journal and the geological surveys in a loose floorboard I discovered beneath the old bear rug in the master bedroom. By evening, the cabin looked welcoming, but revealed nothing of its secrets. George stopped by with fresh firewood and a warning. "Remember, they'll be looking for weaknesses. Don't give them any." After he left, I stood alone in the cabin that was quickly becoming my sanctuary rather than my exile. The mountains outside the windows felt protective rather than isolating. For the first time since James's death, I felt truly at peace. That night, I slept soundly in the master bedroom, lulled by the symphony of crickets and the distant call of an owl. I dreamed of James, young and vibrant, showing me blueprints for a life I couldn't quite make out. When I woke, his words echoed in my mind. Remember who you are, Grace. You've always been stronger than you believe. The sound of tires on gravel announced Richard and Brooke's arrival shortly before noon. I watched from the window as their sleek black Mercedes navigated the bumpy driveway, looking comically out of place against the rustic setting. Brooke emerged first, her face twisted with distaste as her designer heels sank slightly into the soft ground. Richard followed, scanning the property with an appraising eye that reminded me more of a real estate developer than a son visiting his mother. I opened the door before they could knock. Welcome to my home. Brooke's eyes widened as she stepped inside, clearly surprised by the cabin's transformation. This looks different than I expected. Much better than that dump I remember, Richard muttered, setting their overnight bag by the door. He studied the new fixtures, the fresh paint. You've been busy. I've had help, I said simply, leading them to the living room where coffee and homemade muffins waited. Please, make yourselves comfortable. They sat stiffly on the sofa, looking like foreign dignitaries in enemy territory. Brooke's gaze darted around the room, as if searching for something valuable. Mother, Richard began, accepting the coffee I offered. We've been concerned about you all alone up here. It's so isolated. I've found it quite peaceful, actually. I sat across from them, back straight, hands steady. After everything that happened, I needed the quiet. Brooke's smile didn't reach her eyes. We want what's best for you, Grace. That's why we've brought some options to discuss. Richard produced a folder from his briefcase. I've researched several excellent retirement communities in Northern Virginia. Very exclusive, excellent medical facilities on site. For when you start to decline, Brooke added with faux sweetness. I'm 62, not 90, I reminded them, keeping my voice light, and I'm in excellent health. Still, Richard pressed, this place isn't practical. The winters are harsh, you're far from hospitals, and the maintenance alone is manageable, I finished for him. I've already handled the most urgent repairs. Richard frowned. With what money? I sipped my coffee, savoring the moment. Your father made arrangements. A flash of alarm crossed his face. What kind of arrangements? A maintenance fund. Nothing extravagant, but enough to make the place livable. Brooke leaned forward, abandoning pretense. But surely you don't want to stay here permanently. This land must be worth something to developers. We could handle the sale for you. Get you settled somewhere appropriate. Somewhere appropriate, I repeated, studying her perfectly manicured nails, her expertly highlighted hair. And what exactly would be appropriate for a stinking old woman like me, Brooke? Her cheeks flushed. That was a misunderstanding. I was upset after the will reading. Were you? I set down my cup. Or were you showing me exactly who you are? The room fell silent. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Mother, let's be practical. What can this place possibly offer you compared to what you could get with the proceeds from selling it? I gazed out the window at the mountains bathed in autumn splendor. Peace, independence, dignity, things I've found in short supply recently. By the hardening of their expressions, I knew the real battle had just begun. Dinner that evening was a masterpiece of tense civility. I'd prepared James's favorite, pot roast with rosemary potatoes, and opened a bottle of good wine. Richard picked at his food, while Brooke performed an unconvincing impression of a caring daughter-in-law, complimenting my cooking with saccharine sweetness. So who exactly is this George person? Richard asked, setting down his fork. Mother, you need to be careful about strangers taking advantage of your situation. George Alcott is hardly a stranger, I replied. He was your father's friend for over a decade. He's been maintaining this property all those years. Brooke exchanged a quick glance with Richard. That's impossible. James hadn't been here in years. He told us the place was falling apart. Apparently there are many things James didn't share with you, I said mildly, refilling their wine glasses. He came here quite regularly, according to the townspeople. Richard's forehead creased. That's ridiculous. Dad was always in D.C. or at home. He didn't have time for, trips to this place. He made time, I countered. Every few months, like clockwork. And you didn't know? Brooke's tone suggested I was either lying or oblivious. James and I trusted each other. I didn't track his movements. I met her gaze steadily. When you've built a marriage on respect rather than control, it works differently. The barb hit its mark. Brooke's smile froze as she reached for her wine glass. After dinner, Richard insisted on walking the property. As dusk settled over the mountains, he paced the perimeter, assessing the land with calculating eyes. I followed at a distance, watching my son transform into a stranger before me. The road access is good, he noted, more to himself than to me. Views are exceptional. With the right marketing, this could attract luxury cabin developers. I'm not selling, Richard. He turned to face me, silhouetted against the setting sun. Mother, be reasonable. What will you do when winter comes? When you need medical care? When you can't maintain this place anymore? I'll manage, I said firmly. This is my home now. This isn't a home, he snapped, patience finally breaking. It's a burden Dad left you with while giving me everything else, don't you see? He knew this place was worthless compared to the penthouse, the investments. I studied my son's face in the fading light, searching for the boy I'd raised. Is that what this visit is really about? Making sure you got the better end of your father's will? He had the grace to look embarrassed. Of course not. We're concerned about you. Are you? I stepped closer. Then why did you pack my things before the will was even read? Why did Brooke call me a stinking old woman and push me out the door like garbage? Richard paled. She didn't mean... She meant every word, I interrupted. And you stood there and let it happen. My own son. You're being dramatic. We offered you a place to stay until you could legally get rid of me. I finished. Tell me, when did I become such a burden to you? Was it when I spent 3 nights at your bedside when you had pneumonia in college? Or when I helped plan your wedding to the last detail? Or perhaps when I gave you $30,000 when your first business venture failed? Richard's jaw tightened. That was different. I paid that money back. Yes, but the love, the care, the sacrifice. When do I get those back, Richard? He had no answer for that. Later that night, I heard them whispering in the guest room, their voices rising occasionally before dropping back to urgent murmurs. I caught fragments. Has to be a reason. All this work. Old fool. Check the property records. I smiled grimly in the darkness of my bedroom. They were beginning to suspect something, but had no idea what they were truly missing. The next morning, Brooke cornered me in the kitchen while Richard showered. Her smile was gone, replaced by cold efficiency. Grace, let's cut to the chase. This little mountain fantasy is charming, but it won't last. You know that. I continued making breakfast, cracking eggs into a bowl. Is that so? You're being stubborn for no reason. Richard and I could get you at least $500,000 for this property. That would set you up comfortably for the rest of your life. I whisked the eggs with deliberate care. $500,000? For worthless land? She faltered slightly. The views alone make it valuable. With the right marketing? Brooke, I interrupted gently. Why are you so interested in my worthless cabin? You made your feelings perfectly. Clear at the will reading. Her eyes narrowed. I'm trying to help you. No. I set down the whisk and faced her directly. You're trying to help yourself. The question is, to what? Before she could answer, Richard appeared in the doorway, dressed in hiking clothes. I thought I'd explore the back acres this morning. See what we're dealing with. We? I raised an eyebrow. This property is in my name alone, Richard. His smile was thin. Figure of speech, Mother. Just trying to get a sense of the place. After breakfast, Richard disappeared into the woods while Brooke made business calls from the porch. I used their distraction to check the hiding place beneath the floorboard. The documents were undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. I called George from my bedroom. They're suspicious, I whispered. Richard's out surveying the back acres right now. Does he know where to look? George asked. I don't think so. The survey markers are well hidden according to James's notes. Still, we should move up the timeline. I've contacted Attorney Winthrop as James instructed. He can meet you Monday in Washington. I glanced toward the window where I could see Brooke pacing on the porch, phone pressed to her ear. I'll be there. By the time Richard returned from his expedition, muddy and frustrated, I had prepared a simple lunch. He said nothing about what he'd found, or hadn't found, during his exploration. This place gets to you after a while, he admitted, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. The quiet, the isolation. It's not for, everyone, I agreed. He studied me with new eyes. You've changed, Mother. A week ago, you were devastated. Lost. Now you seem different. I suppose I am, I said truthfully. Sometimes we find strength in unexpected places. The remainder of their visit passed in a delicate dance of feigned concern and hidden agendas. By Sunday afternoon, their frustration was palpable, as they prepared to leave. Richard made one final attempt. Mother, at least consider selling, for your own good. I walked them to their car, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. I've made my decision, Richard. This is my home now. Brooke couldn't contain herself any longer. This isn't over, Grace. You're being ridiculous, throwing away a comfortable future for, what, pride? Spite? I looked into her cold, beautiful face and felt only pity. Neither. I'm choosing peace, something you might want to consider. Richard started the engine, his expression unreadable. We'll talk again soon. Yes, I agreed. I expect we will. I watched their car disappear down the mountain road, standing on the porch long after the dust had settled. The first phase of James's plan was complete. Richard and Brooke had revealed their intentions, and now it was time for me to reveal mine. Monday would change everything, and I was finally ready. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp. I dressed with care in a tailored navy suit I'd found in the back of the cabin closet, one of James's surprises, perfectly my size, with the tag still attached. The elegant outfit felt like armor as I prepared for battle. George arrived promptly at 7 to drive me to Washington. You look ready to conquer the world, he observed, holding the car door for me. Just my small corner of it, I replied, settling into the passenger seat. The leather portfolio containing James's documents rested securely on my lap, a roadmap to my future. The autumn countryside blurred past my window as we descended from the mountains toward the city. With each mile, I felt the weight of my old life pressing closer, but it no longer had the power to crush me. Nervous? George asked as the Washington skyline appeared in the distance. Strangely, no. I smiled. For the first time since James died, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. The law offices of Jenkins and Winthrop occupied the top floor of a glass and steel building in downtown Washington. The receptionist escorted us to a corner conference room with sweeping views of the Potomac, the same river Richard's penthouse overlooked. Marcus Winthrop rose to greet us, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. Mrs. Holloway, at last. James spoke of you often. You knew my husband well? I asked, shaking his hand. We were at Georgetown together. When he discovered the lithium deposits, I was his first call. He gestured toward the conference table where 3 people in business attire waited. These representatives have been pursuing your land for some time. James asked that I arrange this meeting when you were ready. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling James's presence beside me. The corporate representatives introduced themselves. Emma Chen from Greentech Minerals, David Forster from American Battery Corporation, and Michael Reynolds from Eastern Energy Solutions. All 3 wore the polished, hungry look of people accustomed to closing deals. Mrs. Holloway, Emma began, we're delighted to finally meet you. Your husband was reluctant to engage with our proposals. James was protecting our options, I replied smoothly. Now I'm here to explore them. For the next 2 hours, I listened as they outlined their competing offers for the mineral rights. The numbers were staggering. Initial payments of $30 to $45 million, with royalties that could double or triple that amount over time. Before I make any decisions, I said when they finished, there's something I need to address. I opened my portfolio and removed a document. Mr. Winthrop, could you please explain the significance of this filing? Marcus examined the paper. This is a registration of the mineral rights to your property, separating them legally from the land deed. James filed this 3 years ago, putting the mineral rights solely in your name. Meaning that even if you sold the property itself, you would retain complete control of anything extracted from beneath it. The land and the minerals are legally distinct assets. I nodded, processing this. And these rights transfer to my heirs only upon my death, correct? That's correct, Marcus confirmed, and only to the heirs you designate in writing. A plan was forming in my mind. Not revenge. Exactly, but justice. I'll need time to consider these offers. The representatives exchanged glances. Michael leaned forward. Mrs. Holloway, we understand this is a significant decision, but the market for lithium is extremely competitive. Our offers have expiration dates. As do we all, Mr. Reynolds, I replied calmly. I'll have my answer by the end of the week. After they departed, Marcus smiled approvingly. James said you were a force when necessary. I'm learning to be, I admitted. There's one more thing James arranged, Marcus said, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. A trust in your name, funded with $5 million he kept separate from his other assets. He called it your Independence Fund. My hands trembled as I accepted the folder. He never mentioned this. It was important to him that you have resources no one could touch. The money is immediately available. Tears blurred my vision. Even now, James was caring for me, ensuring I would never be truly vulnerable again. As George drove me back to the cabin, my phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "Mother," he began without preamble, "Brooke and I have been discussing your situation and we've decided to make you an offer. $1 million for the cabin and land. That's twice what it's worth." I smiled at his transparent desperation. "That's generous, Richard, but I'm not interested." "Be reasonable," he snapped. "This is a substantial offer. You're being stubborn for no good reason." "There's always a reason, Richard. Your father taught me that." His voice hardened. "If this is about punishing us for how things happened after the will reading." "It's not about punishment," I interrupted. "It's about choices. Mine, yours, your father's." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I have a meeting with my attorney tomorrow. I think you should be there. 1 o'clock, Jenkins and Winthrop. Bring Brooke." After hanging up, I noticed George watching me with concern. "Are you sure about this? They might fight you every step of the way." "Let them," I said, gazing at the mountains rising before us. "I'm not afraid anymore." That night, alone in the cabin, I wrote 2 letters. The first to Richard, not an accusation, but a mother's heartfelt reflection on the son she'd raised and lost. The second to James, though he would never read it, thanking him for his final gift of strength. Tuesday's meeting brought the confrontation to its inevitable climax. Richard and Brooke arrived at Jenkins and Winthrop's offices in matching power suits, their expressions a blend of suspicion and greed barely concealed beneath professional veneers. Marcus welcomed them with practiced courtesy. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, please have a seat. Mrs. Grace Holloway has asked me to present some information regarding her property." "If this is about our offer," Richard began, "we're prepared to negotiate." "Actually," I interjected, "this is about transparency, something our family seems to have lost along the way." Marcus distributed folders to each of them. "These documents outline the geological surveys of the Blue Ridge property." Richard opened his folder, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he scanned the contents. Brooke leaned over, her perfectly lined eyes widening. "Is this accurate?" Richard whispered, looking up at me. "Lithium deposits valued at $65 million conservatively," Marcus finished. "Potentially much more as the market continues to grow." Brooke's face drained of color. "That's impossible. James would have told us." "Would he?" I asked quietly. "When you treated me like a burden? When you called me worthless and useless? When you packed my belongings before his will was even read?" Richard set down the folder, his hands visibly shaking. "Mother, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut him off. "Your father did too. That's why he arranged everything exactly as he did." Marcus slid another document across the table. "This filing, registered 3 years ago, separates the mineral rights from the land deed, placing them solely in Grace Holloway's name." "Meaning what, exactly?" Brooke demanded. "Meaning," I explained, "that even if I sold you the cabin and the land, I would still control what's beneath it. And the companies currently bidding for those rights are offering initial payments between $30 and $45 million. The silence that followed was profound. Richard stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Why are you showing us this?" he finally asked. I leaned forward, meeting my son's eyes directly. "Because you're my son, and despite everything, I love you. I wanted you to understand exactly what your father did and why. He wasn't punishing me by giving me the cabin. He was protecting me from what you and Brooke might become if you knew the truth too soon." Brooke stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly manage something like this. You need us." "Actually," Marcus interjected, "Mrs. Holloway has demonstrated remarkable business acumen during our negotiations. The corporate representatives were quite impressed." "I don't need anyone to manage my life," I said firmly. "Not anymore." The ride back to Bethesda and Richard and Brooke's Mercedes was a study in strained silence. I had surprised them by accepting their invitation to dinner. Not out of forgiveness, but because the conversation needed finishing. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. Brooke stared out the passenger window, her reflection in the glass revealing calculations racing behind her eyes. Their Bethesda home, my home until a week ago, loomed large and impersonal as we pulled into the circular driveway. Autumn decorations adorned the entrance, meticulously arranged by Brooke's interior designer rather than her own hands. "We need to talk about this rationally," Richard said as we entered the foyer. There are tax implications, investment strategies. After dinner, I interrupted gently. Some conversations require proper nourishment. The dining room had been set with the fine china I'd once cherished, James's grandmother's Wedgwood pattern, a small gesture that spoke volumes about Brooke's sudden recalibration of my worth. The housekeeper, Maria, who had worked for me for 15 years, served the meal with a warm smile directed solely at me. Good to see you, Mrs. Holloway. The house hasn't been the same. Brooke cleared her throat. That will be all, Maria. As we ate, Richard attempted casual conversation, neighborhood gossip, market fluctuations, the weather, anything but the elephant in the room. Brooke remained unnervingly silent, watching me with the focused attention of a predator recalculating its approach. Finally, as dessert was served, she spoke. We may have gotten off on the wrong foot, Grace. I raised an eyebrow at this masterpiece of understatement. What Brooke means, Richard interjected, is that we regret how things transpired after Dad's will was read. Emotions were high. Grief affected us all. Indeed, I murmured, sampling the creme brulee. Though some grief manifests as cruelty, while other grief manifests as resilience, Brooke set down her spoon. Let's be practical. We're family. These mineral rights, this fortune, should benefit all of us. After all, James was Richard's father. Yes, he was, I agreed, which makes the choices you both made all the more painful. Richard leaned forward. Mother, we made a mistake, a terrible one. But surely we can move forward together, as a family. I studied my son's face, the boy I had loved, the man who had failed me. When you were 10, you saved your allowance for 6 weeks to buy a homeless man in our neighborhood a winter coat. Do you remember? Richard looked startled. Vaguely. James and I were so proud. We thought we'd raised a son with empathy, with character. I set my napkin beside my plate. What happened to that boy, Richard? He had no answer. The truth is, I continued, your father saw the changes in you long before I did. The growing entitlement, the moral compromises. He worried about the influence of wealth on your character. That's unfair, Brooke interjected. Richard works hard. We both do. For what purpose? I challenged. To afford a larger house? More exclusive vacations? At what point did accumulation become your measure of success? Richard's expression hardened. Easy for you to say now that you're sitting on millions. Money I never knew existed until a week ago, I reminded him. Money that hasn't changed who I am or what I value. So what now? Brooke demanded. You'll punish us by keeping everything for yourself? I smiled sadly. Is that what you think this is about? Punishment? Rising from my chair, I walked to the window overlooking the manicured garden where Richard had once played. Tomorrow, I'm signing a contract with Green Tech Minerals. They've offered $39 million up front plus significant royalties. The contract will be in my name alone. Richard's face fell. Mother. However, I continued, I've established the Holloway Foundation with a $20 million endowment. Its mission will be providing housing and support for displaced seniors, people discarded by families who once claimed to love them. The implications of my words hung in the air between us. The foundation will need a board, I added. I've reserved seats for both of you, should you wish to participate. It would require monthly meetings, hands-on work with recipients, and a commitment to service above self-interest. Brooke's laugh was brittle. You can't be serious. Completely serious, I assured her. It's not about the money, Brooke. It never was. It's about who we choose to become when faced with difficult choices. Richard's expression shifted between calculation and genuine remorse. And if we decline, then you'll have made another choice, I said simply. One that will determine our relationship going forward. Later, as Richard drove me back to the cabin under a canopy of stars, we spoke little. The weight of decisions, his, mine, James's, filled the space between us. At the cabin driveway, he finally broke the silence. I don't know how to fix this. That's a start, I acknowledged, recognizing that something is broken. I let Brooke influence me too much, he admitted. Let myself become someone I'm not proud of. Brooke didn't force you to stand silent while I was humiliated, I reminded him gently. She didn't make you pack my things before your father's will was read. Those were your choices, Richard. He nodded, eyes fixed on the steering wheel. Do you think you can ever forgive me? I already have, I said truthfully. Forgiveness was necessary for my peace, not yours. The real question is whether we can rebuild trust. As I stepped from the car, he called after me. The foundation board. I'd like to be part of it. Not for the money, but because I need to remember who I was meant to be. I nodded, not quite ready to embrace this tentative olive branch. The first meeting is next month. I'll send the details. Watching his taillights disappear down the mountain road, I felt a complex mixture of grief and hope. The son I had raised was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of entitlement and moral compromise. Whether he would fight to reclaim that better self remained to be seen. George's truck was parked beside the cabin, a warm light glowing from the porch lamp he'd installed. He sat in one of the Adirondack chairs, keeping watch like a faithful guardian. "How did it go?" he asked as I climbed the steps. "About as expected," I sighed, settling into the chair beside him. The night air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. "Richard might be salvageable. Brooke is Brooke." George nodded, understanding all I hadn't said. "James would be proud of how you handled things." "I hope so," I whispered. "I'm trying to honor what he wanted. Not revenge, but justice. Not punishment, but consequence." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains that had become my unexpected sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and contracts, foundation paperwork, and new responsibilities. But tonight, in this peaceful moment, I could finally feel the pieces of my shattered life reassembling into something new, something stronger than before. "You know," George said after a while, "there's an old saying in these mountains. Sometimes the best view comes after the hardest climb." I smiled, understanding the truth of those words in my bones. The cabin had been the beginning, not the end. And the journey ahead, though uncharted, no longer seemed frightening. For the first time since James's death, I felt truly alive. Winter settled over the Blue Ridge Mountains like a benediction, wrapping the cabin in a peaceful blanket of white. December marked 3 months since I'd arrived. 3 months of profound transformation, both of the property and myself. The cabin renovations had expanded with the guidance of a talented local architect who specialized in sustainable mountain homes. Solar panels now crowned the roof, a greenhouse addition captured the southern sunlight, and the interior had been thoughtfully modernized while preserving its rustic charm. What had once been a dusty, broken exile had become a showcase of elegant mountain living. I stood at the kitchen counter, preparing tea as I reviewed the latest foundation documents. The Holloway Foundation had moved from concept to reality with surprising speed, thanks in part to Marcus Winthrop's connections and my newfound confidence. We had already secured a building in Washington, D.C. that would become transitional housing for displaced seniors, with construction set to begin after the new year. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. George entered, stomping snow from his boots, his arms laden with firewood. "Storm's picking up," he reported, arranging logs in the wood box. "They're saying we might get a foot by morning." "I've got everything I need," I assured him, pouring 2 cups of tea. Over the months, our friendship had deepened into something comfortable and true. George had become my confidant, my advisor, and occasionally, when memories of James hit hardest, my strength. He accepted the tea gratefully, warming his hands around the mug. "Richard called while you were in town. Said he'd be up tomorrow if the roads are clear." I nodded, unsurprised. Richard had been making the drive from Bethesda every Sunday for the past 6 weeks. At first awkwardly, then with increasing openness as he worked to repair what he'd broken. "Alone again?" George asked. "Yes. Brooke refuses to return." I smiled faintly. "Says the mountain air disagrees with her." What truly disagreed with Brooke was the new power dynamic. After the revelation of my fortune, she had cycled through attempts at manipulation, hollow reconciliation, and finally, bitter acceptance. She'd declined a position on the foundation board, claiming the work was beneath her expertise, while Richard had surprised us all by embracing the opportunity with unexpected dedication. "He's different each time he comes," I observed, moving to the living room where a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. "Less polished, more authentic. Last week he actually wore jeans." George chuckled. "Civilization is falling. Or perhaps being rebuilt," I countered softly. The mining operations had begun on the eastern slope of the property, far enough from the cabin to preserve my tranquility, but close enough that I could oversee the work. Emma Chen from Green Tech had proved to be an ethical partner, committed to environmental responsibility and fair labor practices. The initial payment had been deposited, a sum so vast it still seemed unreal despite the careful investment strategy Marcus had helped me develop. "Did you finish that business with the Riverdale Town Council?" George asked, settling into his usual armchair. I nodded, pride warming me more than the fire. The deal is done. Construction on the community center starts in April. One of my first decisions had been to allocate funds for Riverdale's revitalization, not as charity, but as investment, in the community that had welcomed me. The planned center would house a library, medical clinic, and vocational training facility, bringing jobs and opportunities to a town that had been slowly fading for decades. James would love what you're doing, George said quietly. I think he knew I would do something like this, I replied, gazing at the fire. He left clues in his journal, ideas he'd been considering, conversations he'd had with you. He talked about it sometimes, George admitted. Said you had a gift for seeing potential in people and places others had written off. Said that's why he fell in love with you all those years ago. A comfortable silence settled between us, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the increasing whistle of wind around the cabin's sturdy walls. I thought about the journey of the past months, from displaced widow to independent woman, from betrayed mother to cautious mentor, from lost soul to found purpose. The phone rang, startling us both. Richard's voice sounded strained when I answered. Mother, I need to tell you something. Something important. Are you all right? I asked, immediately concerned. Yes, but things with Brooke have reached a breaking point. He took a deep breath. I've asked for a divorce. The news shouldn't have surprised me, yet it did. Richard, are you sure this is what you want? It's what I need, he said firmly. After Dad died, after what happened with you, I started seeing a therapist. He's helped me understand how much of myself I've compromised over the years, how far I've strayed from what matters. What did Brooke say? She's furious. Claims I'm choosing you over her, choosing moral superiority over our marriage. His bitter laugh held no humor. The truth is, I'm finally choosing myself, the self I can respect when I look in the mirror. After we hung up, I shared the news with George, who received it with a thoughtful nod. Some foundations need to crumble before better ones can be built, he observed. That night, as the storm raged outside, I sat at James's old desk reviewing applications for the Foundation's first round of assistance grants. Each story of displacement, of elders abandoned or exploited by family, echoed fragments of my own experience. Yet in helping to write new endings for these strangers, I was healing my own wounds. A text message from Maria, my former housekeeper, appeared on my phone. Miss you, Mrs. H. The new place feels empty without your kindness. Richard packed all his clothes today. Mrs. Brooke threw your crystal vase at the wall when he left. I sighed, not taking pleasure in Brooke's pain despite everything she had done. There was tragedy in her inability to see beyond the material, to value connection above acquisition. In some ways, she was more imprisoned than I had ever been. As midnight approached, I stood at the picture window watching snow transform the landscape into something magical and new. The mountain that had initially seemed like my exile had become my kingdom, not one of isolation, but of possibility. Tomorrow, Richard would arrive seeking refuge from his collapsing marriage. Tomorrow, more decisions would need to be made about the foundation, the mining operation, the community projects. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and triumphs. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary I had built from abandonment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for James's foresight, for George's friendship, for the difficult journey that had led me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. I touched the emerald ring James had left in the cabin trunk, a family heirloom I'd thought lost years ago. Like me, it had been waiting here all along, its value hidden until the moment was right. Outside, the storm gradually calmed, stars emerging between parting clouds. Nature's reminder that even the fiercest tempests eventually yield to peace. Spring arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains with spectacular generosity, painting the landscape in vibrant greens and delicate wildflowers. 1 year had passed since James's death, a full cycle of seasons that had transformed both the cabin and my life beyond recognition. On this perfect May morning, I walked the newly created path that wound through my property, marveling at how different everything looked in the clarity of hindsight. What had once seemed like punishment had been protection. What had felt like ending had been beginning. The hillside meadow ahead had been prepared for today's gathering. Rows of white chairs facing a simple wooden podium, wildflowers arranged in mason jars along the aisle. In a few hours, people would arrive from Washington, from Riverdale, from various corners of my old and new lives to celebrate the official launch of the Holloway Foundation's first completed project. Nervous about your speech? George asked, appearing beside me on the path. After a winter of quiet companionship, our relationship had blossomed into something neither of us had expected, a tender romance built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Terrified, I admitted, slipping my hand into his. Public speaking was always James's domain, not mine. You'll be magnificent, he assured me. You always are. We continued our inspection of the preparations. The catering tent was being set up near the cabin, which now served as both my home and the Foundation's retreat center. Local women from Riverdale bustled about, arranging flowers and setting tables with an ownership that warmed my heart. This celebration belonged to them, too, the first of many community triumphs we would share. Richard just called, George mentioned as we turned back toward the cabin. He's picking up Maria and will be here by noon to help with the final arrangements. I nodded, pleased. In the months since his divorce filing, Richard had been rebuilding himself with humble determination. He'd moved into a modest apartment, redirected his legal career toward elder advocacy, and become the Foundation's most dedicated board member. The entitled man who had once stood silent while I was cast out had been replaced by someone recognizable again as my son. Brooke, meanwhile, had fought the divorce with vengeful energy, demanding most of their assets and spreading vicious rumors about Richard's abandonment. When the final settlement gave her the Bethesda house and a generous financial package, but not the access to my fortune she'd clearly anticipated, she had sent a scathing email accusing me of stealing her husband's loyalty. Her final line had been revealing, "You may think you've won, but happiness never lasts for people like you." She couldn't understand that I had never viewed any of this as a competition to be won or lost, but as a journey toward reclaiming dignity. By mid-afternoon, the meadow filled with guests. The mayor of Riverdale sat proudly in the front row beside Marcus Winthrop and Emma Chen, whose company had become a model of responsible mining practices. Behind them were faces from Washington society who had once overlooked me at James's corporate events, but now sought my philanthropic influence. Most meaningful were the elders, 20 formerly homeless seniors who would be the first residents of Grace House, the Foundation's inaugural housing project in Washington. They had arrived by bus that morning, many seeing mountains for the first time, all carrying stories of abandonment and renewal that paralleled my own. As I rose to approach the podium, Richard caught my eye from his seat in the front row, giving me an encouraging nod. He looked younger somehow, unburdened, dressed in casual clothes that would have horrified Brooke, but suited the man he was becoming. "Welcome to what we locals call Hidden Treasure Mountain," I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. It's a fitting name for this place that appears to be one thing on the surface but contains so much more beneath. The audience quieted, attentive. 1 year ago, I arrived here in disgrace, abandoned, humiliated, and convinced my life was effectively over. I paused, allowing the memory to surface without letting it wound me again. What I couldn't see then was that endings often disguise themselves as beginnings. I gestured toward the renovated cabin gleaming in the sunlight. This property was meant to be my exile, but instead became my sanctuary. The mineral wealth beneath our feet was meant to be my secret burden, but instead became a resource for community renewal. The representatives from Riverdale nodded appreciatively, already witnessing how the Foundation's investments were revitalizing their town. Today, we celebrate not just the opening of Grace House in Washington, but a philosophy that guides everything the Holloway Foundation stands for. No one is disposable. No one is useless. Everyone deserves dignity, regardless of age or circumstance. I found the faces of the elders in the crowd, making eye contact with each one. When society tells us we are too old, too difficult, too inconvenient, that is precisely when we must stand tallest. When families forget their obligations, communities must remember theirs. Richard's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He understood the words were not meant to wound him, but to heal us both. James Holloway, my late husband, understood something profound about human nature, I continued. He knew that adversity reveals character, both its flaws and its potential. His final gift to me wasn't this land or its mineral wealth, but the opportunity to discover my own hidden treasures, strength I didn't know I possessed, purpose I might never have found, relationships I might never have valued. I gestured toward George, toward Richard, toward the community that had embraced me. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties, but in dignity maintained, in kindness extended, in legacies that outlive us. As the applause faded, and people moved toward the reception, I found myself standing with Richard at the edge of the meadow, gazing at the mountains that had witnessed our family's unraveling and partial restoration. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about choosing to carry light instead of darkness. He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. That's why you never sought revenge against Brooke or me. You chose light. I chose peace, I corrected gently. There's a difference between forgiving and forgetting. Trust must be rebuilt slowly, with actions rather than promises. I'm trying, he assured me. I know, I acknowledged. That's why we're standing here together. Later, as the celebration continued into evening, George and I slipped away to the cabin porch where it had all begun. The valley below twinkled with lights from Riverdale, a town being reborn through opportunity rather than charity. James would be proud, George said, his arm warm around my shoulders in the cooling evening air. Of everything you've accomplished, of who you've become. I leaned against him, savoring the simple joy of being valued for exactly who I was. I think he always saw this version of me, even when I couldn't see it myself. The sky deepened to indigo, stars appearing like distant promises. On the meadow, laughter and music continued, the sounds of community, of connection, of life moving forward. 1 year ago, I had driven up this mountain road in disgrace, believing everything worthwhile in my life was behind me. I had been wrong. The cabin that was meant to be my punishment had become my salvation, revealing that sometimes the world throws you away only so you can finally discover your true worth. And that is a treasure beyond price.